Thank you everybody for joining us on this slightly grey afternoon. Hopefully we can bring some sunshine. Today I should introduce us first, apologies. For those who don't know, we are 10 to 2. We are specialists in flexible recruiting and like to provide as much guidance and advice to our clients as humanly possible. And one of the ways that we do that is a series of webinars that we run, this being one. I'm sure that some of you are feeling completely baffled by the world of recruitment at the moment. So hopefully today will help streamline things and give you a bit of guidance. Recruitment made simple, getting hiring right the first time. We have got quite a lot of content to get through today, so I'm not going to ramble for too long. Deb knows how much I like to talk. But just to give you some pointers, we will be recording today's session and sharing it with you. So please do feel free to scribble notes if you want to, but also don't feel like you have to. Also, you will see that we're not live streaming everybody's faces, so you can stuff a sandwich or have a tea or do whatever it is you want to do in the background. If you do have questions and queries, we would love to be able to answer them. There is a Q&A box on your screen. Please do just click on that, type away your query, and either I will come back to you in the background while Deb is talking, or we will address your question either through the content or if we've got time at the Q&A afterwards. If there's something really specific that you want to talk about, then Deb and I or anyone from the team is always available, and our contact details will be shared at the end. Please do get in touch. We would love to be able to help. I think that's all I have to say, isn't it? We'll try and keep it as swift as possible so that you can all get out and get a little, I was going to say some sunshine in your lunch break, but that's not going to happen. So without further ado, I will hand over to our lovely Managing Director, Deborah.
Thanks, Jo. You really can talk, can't you? Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is going to be a quick whiz through of recruitment end to end. I think that some of you will know bits and pieces of this, but hopefully everybody will learn something in this session. I'm going to whiz through. So if there is any element that you want to dive deeper into, as Jo said, just get in touch afterwards, more than happy to help. So what are we going to be talking about? Let me see. Oh, it's working. Yay. Here's our agenda. We're going to talk about terminology, why flexibility is important, job description, routes to market, the interview process, securing the perfect candidate, onboarding, and then Q&As at the end if we have time. So I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to start with some real basics. A lot of our clients often start their recruitment journey with us, making their first hire. And one of the first things they often say to us is, I don't understand the whole basis of employment. So I thought I'd quickly start by just talking about what they mean, the actual terms that you'll hear bandied around in recruitment. So most people understand employed in a permanent position. It's where it's an ongoing relationship until one or the other person decides through acceptable terms to end that working relationship. The employer's in control, work is on the work, how it's assigned, the time, location, all of that. So most people understand that. Then you can also have fixed term employed contracts, which is pretty much the same basis, but there's an agreed date when that employment will end. Then you have freelance and consultants. And in this type of contract, the freelancer or consultant is engaged by rather than employed by the company. So normally outcomes are set by the employer, but how, when, and where are all controlled by the individual delivering the work. And then we have temps who are employed by third-party agencies such as 10 to 2 and are charged out to the business usually by the hour. And normally on both a freelance and a temporary basis, you won't be as an employer liable for pension costs, national insurance, that type of thing. But what you'll see is the fees you pay for those people generally are marked up to include those things. Oh, sorry. Then you've got obviously different ways of employing those people from a location and a working pattern point of view. And all of those things on the left can be done in all of those ways in the right. So they could be part-time, remote, hybrid, compressed hours, however, whatever works best for you. So we wouldn't be 10 to 2 if we didn't talk a little bit about flexible working. So I just want to touch on this to say flexible working is really so common now, but the real business benefits are massive. So if you're not currently employing people flexibly, you really should be thinking about it, and I'll go on to explain why. But here are the, just quickly, top list of benefits. If you're a small business, you can start small. You can start with someone on 1 or 2 days a week, keep your costs low. Offering flexibility when you're advertising a job attracts a completely different talent pool. And it also allows you, because of the lower cost, allows you to attract more senior people at a level you probably wouldn't be able to afford if you were employing that person full-time. By definition, it increases diversity because you're opening the talent pool up, often to women. And then there's huge amounts of evidence that says flexible workforces have higher retention levels and happier workforce. So it's sort of a win-win at every level. Part-time, again, part-time is not the poor relative it once was, although people still seem to have a slight, ooh, what do you mean part-time? We work on some really senior roles, very successfully placing people into part-time positions. And again, it's that whole cost benefit. You know, the candidate's really happy because they've got some flexibility in their working life. Clients really happy because they're generally saving money by not employing someone full-time and getting some serious talent in the mix. So these are just some stats I thought are really interesting. 76 of employees are more likely to apply for a role if there are flexible hours. 2/3 of workers are willing to take a pay cut for more flexibility or a shorter work week. And flexible hours are deemed a top indicator of a progressive company by 41% of people. So just by adding flexible hours or a discussion, you're happy to have a discussion about a flexible working pattern, actually will increase the type and quality of candidates you're going to achieve. Women, unsurprisingly, place a higher importance on flexible working opportunities. 37% of full-time workers would consider working part-time, and there are around now 8.5 million people in the UK working part-time. So it's a really interesting thing to consider if you never have before. So just moving on to now the actual recruitment process, and it all starts with the job design, and I can't stress how important this is. So if you've got a job, it could be someone's leaving, or you've just got a brand new position. And these questions are the things to ask yourself in either situation. So often cost is going to be the driver. You know, what can the business afford? And often what we have a conversation with clients about is pick your upper budget, but have a little bit of flex. Just in case the most fantastic candidate shows up, you want to be able to flex if you can. So start by thinking, what is my budget? What can I get for my budget? Then think about what would the ideal be? So what skills would this person have? What background would they have? What experience would they have? Then how will this work with my existing team? You know, you don't want to bring someone into a new job or replace someone in a job that's then going to upset a happy team environment. So always think about, if somebody's left, is there any roles, parts of their job that someone else in the team might love to take on and that would give them some development experience? Do you actually need to replace the person like for like? Could you move some responsibilities, split the responsibilities, potentially bring a more junior person in to take some responsibilities while helping someone else develop? Think about your succession plan and how the role fits into that. So if you know you're going to need, let's think about a finance example. If you know you're going to need a CFO in 2 years' time, make sure you bring someone in at, say, FC level that's ambitious, going to be looking for that move, rather than someone who just wants to stay put and not take on any more responsibilities in the future. Always, I would say, sit and think, have I thought differently about this? Because it's so easy to just fall into, oh, here's the job description from the job last time. I'll update it a tiny bit, but even if the job has changed, and then I'll just go out to market. And then when you start looking at candidates thinking, not quite what I wanted. And actually what you might find is it's just that the job design needs more thought and work before you get to pulling up to the sourcing candidate stage. I would always say, think about, do you really need full-time? You can get some great skills for less than full-time and save some money in the process. Do you really need someone that senior? Because that's the other thing, is when you're replacing or creating a new job, people tend to go for top dollar. Sometimes you could split a role into two and save some money in the process. We talked about allocating tasks. Then the final thing to think about is the role pitched at the right level to attract the right candidates? So there's no point, if your budget is 30K, but actually you want 10 years experience, that's unlikely to happen. So be realistic at the job design stage on what your budget will actually get you. And if you don't know, then obviously you could do your own research, but agencies like 10 to 2 can always advise on salary levels if you're stuck. So once you've got your job designed, you've got a job spec, you need to look at your routes to market. And there's two really, external and internal. The first is the agency route. Obviously, we know all about that. If you want low hassle and keep your time investment at a minimum, an agency is the way to go. They're experts in what they do it every day. They can get the whole process down to a very few CVs of ideal candidates, rather than you wading out there in the job market and being deluged with inappropriate CVs. Job boards is the next route, and job boards are very good at what they do. They're often quite cheap. You can post a job very readily, and then you get deluged with CVs, often inappropriately. So if you're not an expert or you don't have much background in recruitment, it can be quite overwhelming. We have examples where you get over 100 applicants for a job, many of whom are not useful.
An
Jo?
interesting query has actually just come through on a related topic. One of the people joining today has asked if there is particular wording they can use in a job ad, or ways in which they can try and reduce that volume of candidates. I mean, I think you and I know that it's a modern phenomenon where you will get a huge volume of candidates, but are we able to share any hints and tips on ways that to reduce that volume?
Yes, I mean, it's a tricky one, because if you make the job specs so tight, lots of people, particularly women, won't apply unless they tick all the boxes. So on one hand, you're restricting your pool by making the job spec very tight, but on the other, it might stop people applying. What we have seen over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years is we seem to be in this sort of one-click society, where actually people have their CV loaded on a platform, they see a job title that is vaguely in their ballpark, and they click apply, and it takes them 1 second and one button, and then all the work is with the recruiter to have to go, is this person suitable or not? And actually, even then, when you talk to the people, we personally screen everybody who looks potentially suitable for a role. They haven't read the job spec, so actually they can't do the hours or the location or so it really is time consuming. So I feel your pain. There are on job boards, you do get these pre-screening questionnaires, which can be very useful, particularly if you've got something very particular, like they must be able to use Xero. So you can put that in, and that does help a little bit. But again, if someone is just going to do the one-click application, they just click yes anyway. So you're never, unfortunately, in today's technology-driven environment, you're never going to avoid it entirely. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
No worries. And then you have headhunters. So if you've got a very senior role, headhunters tend to work on a retained basis. So you pay in advance for their services and throughout the process. And really, it's for the director level upwards, I would say, to use that. And then internally, you obviously have a company website and your own socials, which can work really, really well because you're talking to an engaged audience. But again, it'll be quite a limited pool who are going to be seeing those ads. So I would always suggest you do one from each side of this. And then contacts, obviously personal contacts. If you're a really small business, often that's where small businesses start. They know someone who knows someone. And we see it work well. We often have to pick up the pieces when someone has employed a friend of a friend. It's all gone horribly wrong. So all I would say is just be cautious. And I think if you do have a personal contact, it's still always best to ask an agency to work on the brief just as a comparison, or try and get some external candidates to compare. So once you're out there in the market, there's a big chunk of work in terms of deciding who you want to bring in for interviews. So the interview process obviously varies by company size and the role in question, but what we see, so if you were using an agency would do all of the finding the candidates, the pre-screening, and present you with a short list of 3 to 5 people who are suitable for the job. If you're doing it yourself, that pre-screening call is really important, and I would always recommend you do it on video. It gets a really good indicator as to whether the person's engaged, whether they're professional, whether they're serious about the opportunity. So that used to be done by telephone, but the fact that people have video now is so much better. And then generally what we see is that pre-screening and then a face-to-face, and then depending on the seniority of the role, one more stage. What I would say is it's really important up front to know who your stakeholders are in the recruitment process, because if you haven't involved someone, say, I don't know, the MD of your company, if they do want to be part of that decision making, then you need to include them up front with the job design and make sure there's time in their diary to do the final sign off, if that's how the process works in your organization. What we see often is that all the stakeholders are engaged in different parts of the process, but what happens is because of that, the process is extended really, really lengthily, and you end up with the candidates just getting fed up and walking away or being offered something else somewhere else. So yeah, I just make sure within the interview process you know who wants to be involved and that they're all lined up in the process.
Sorry to interrupt again. I think your comment on making sure they're involved in the job design is really important as well, because another thing that we see is different stakeholders coming at the role from different angles, and leading to confusion from the candidate's point of view as to what the actual core purpose of the role is within the organisation. Everybody can understand that different stakeholders will have a different level of interest or maybe a different agenda for that particular role. So making sure everybody's lined up in terms of diaries, but also lined up in terms of the main focus of the role and who it is that you're looking for is really, really key. Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. I thought I'd just spend a little tiny bit on the interview structure. So again, we do a whole webinar on this. But I think it's quite important. If you're new to recruitment and you're having to do this process, it can be a bit frightening, actually. So you've got a nervous interviewer and a nervous interviewee, and it often doesn't bode well. So this is just a general structure we always talk about. If you've got someone in front of you, first 10 minutes or so, describe and explain your business, sell the business. You'd be surprised how many candidates leave interviews going, oh, yeah, I wasn't very inspired actually. And you think, oh no, it's a great company and they're lovely. Why wouldn't you want to work there? But, this is a sales process to the candidate. We're seeing candidates being counter offered and have multiple offers on the table. And that's very different actually from a few years ago. So first 10 minutes, describing, explaining, selling the role and the company. And then the bulk of the interview is obviously going to be asking questions, whether they're competency-based questions, behavioral-based questions. We have some examples if you're at this stage in your processes. Listen very carefully and measure. So we always recommend you have some kind, even if it's a really simple checklist, you have a table that measures the candidate's responses, I don't know, 1 to 5 against the competencies you're looking for, just so, particularly if your interviews are spread out over a week or two, you can compare and remember the candidate's responses well. And heaven forbid, should something ever happen in the background where there's I don't know, somebody said they weren't fairly interviewed, you've got some evidence to say absolutely you were. So that's really important, the measurement. I would always take notes, but don't fixate on them, otherwise it's a bit distracting. And then always allow a good 10 minutes at the end of an interview for the candidate. So it's not just, have you got any questions for us? It's, we really want to know how you feel about the role. Just ask us, throw some questions at us, really make it obvious that they've got some space in the interview. And then always outline next steps, because there's nothing worse than candidates being interviewed and coming away thinking, oh, actually, I don't know what's happening next. Particularly if it's a long process. If you've got 3 or 4 stages, it's really, really important to communicate that as soon as you can. Okay.
I'm going to jump in again. Sorry, I've got another really great question from the audience. Someone has asked that they are considering using AI as part of their interview process. So I'm taking a guess here that this would be asking for the candidate to do a recording to be reviewed at a later stage, and whether we have any insight from our candidates as to whether that is well received or not in the interview process.
Generally not. I think it depends on the job and the type of candidate you're seeking. So if it's a first, very junior role, first jobber, someone very young, they are very used to it, because if they've been applying for grad programs or that sort of thing, AI platform-based tests are all over first job type interview processes. Sort of beyond that, if you've got any experience in the business world, it feels a bit impersonal, unless it's a really great tool. You'll get, I would say people will learn to accept this, but it still feels quite new to a lot of people. So it's not that they can't do it or don't want to do it. It just is, unless you do it really well, it can affect your brand, your company reputation. So yeah, I would just be a little bit careful. If you've got masses of applications, it's a great way to narrow them down. But of course, you'll be biasing your pool that you're going to get, because the people who want to do that will do it, and the people who think, oh, I don't really like the idea of that, won't. So you're automatically biasing the pool you're going to get out the other end. So again, if it's short and sharp, I would say fine if it's done well. I'm just thinking of an example in my head when we had a client do some tests that were so hard that the candidates were just refusing. So they actually ended up with no applicants at all. So yeah, just with a little bit of caution.
And I think also reflect back on why you're bringing that, or why you're potentially bringing that into the process. AI for AI's sake, or automation for automation's sake, isn't always the glistening answer that it says that it will be. As Deb rightly said, if you've got so many candidates that it is a time and process saving tool, then maybe. But actually, if you're just implementing it because you think that you need to implement something to do with AI into your process, then that's probably not a good enough reason to take away that human element.
Yeah, agreed. So as you've probably gathered, you really want an effective process. So these are the key things, really. I won't bother reading it, but keep the candidates informed. I think this is a really interesting stat at the bottom. On average, 55% of candidates believe it should take less than 2 weeks from first interview to job offer. I mean, that is so not true. From our experience, it can be, I mean, really months. But if a candidate's expectation is that, anything over that means you're disappointing them. And if you want them, you don't want to disappoint them because, as I said earlier, this is a sales process. So, securing the one, if you found the person you want, you really don't want to let them get away. There are still talent shortages out there. I mean, actually, it's gone down over the past few years, but we're still hovering in the UK. About 76% of businesses are struggling to fill roles because of a lack of skilled talent. I mean, it's mad. So if you find the person you want, you definitely want to secure them. And it takes on average, and this is if the processes are all smooth and there's no counter offers or anything else, on average, 60 hours to complete a recruitment process. So that's 60 hours you are not doing something else to drive the business forward. So you don't want to repeat that. If you've gone through this and you've found the person, that in itself is valuable time you don't want to have to do again. So the job offer. Some common sticking points are on the left that will be within your control. And then some other common sticking points are on the right, which unfortunately, you can't control. So obviously, all the terms of the job on the left-hand side. Interestingly, we've seen more recently people asking about job titles. So sometimes the candidate might be asking questions and actually you think they want more money, but actually they just want a more senior title and they're happy with the salary. So be careful, find out what the candidate motivations are before changing the terms. Counter offers we're seeing all over the place and other offers we're seeing all over the place. And actually just general uncertainty. So if this is the one I talk about, the process being really strong and good and quick, because if a candidate, what we're seeing is there's so much nervousness in the market at the moment, which I think is driven by the economy. If there's any little negative that comes through, it creates more uncertainty in the candidate. So this is the point when you're making the offer and having these discussions, this is the point you want to make sure you reassure at every opportunity, because candidates will walk away if they're just not sure. Common pitfalls we see. So what we see is that sometimes at contract stage, offer stage, everyone gets really down into the detail and they forget about actually what you want to do here is reach an agreement through probably some kind of compromise. So just keep in mind what your main objective is. Offering a lower than advertised salary or lower than their previous salary is an absolute no. I mean, the candidate will walk away if you do that. And actually changing track from what you've advertised as well is never a good thing, because it creates that seed of doubt, which makes the candidate think, oh, if they said it was 3 days a week and now they're asking for 4, well, what else are they going to change? Being closed to suggestions. So again, this is the other thing, is try and be open-minded at this stage. If you've found the candidate you want, think about, so sometimes the candidate might want more money, but you can't afford more money. So think about a pay review in 6 months' time. And if objectives are met and they've settled in well, then there could be a salary review then. So don't think short term. This person could be with you for 5-10 years. So try not to get too caught up in the details. And again, the whole thing about not moving fast enough. Every day you're not securing that person is a day there's a chance someone else will offer. So managing the notice period, this is another biggie. This is ever increasing. We are seeing more and more people on 3 months notice, even quite junior people, and senior people on 6 months notice. So if you know you've got a recruitment coming up, start working on it. Otherwise you're likely to have a gap between the person leaving and the person starting. As soon as the offer's accepted, treat the candidate like they're an employee, because if it's a 3-month notice period or 6-month notice period, that is plenty of time for that person to go cold, off the boil, get nervous, be offered something else. So even though they've signed a job offer, unless you're prepared to sue them, you want to keep that relationship warm through the whole of their notice period. So over communicate, start to build a relationship, introduce them to a buddy in the team that they're going to be working with, try and build some excitement and share their induction plan. Nothing reassures candidates more than even if it's a really short email to say, day 1, you're going to do this, day 2, you're going to do this, day 3, you're going to do this, even if that's just training and setting up your IT. It shows you're thinking about them before they've started. And then onboarding is critical, because again, and we hear this, someone starts and their IT is not ready, they've got no job spec, they're sitting at their desk twiddling their thumbs, they haven't been introduced to key people. That's really off-putting. It's not a great start to a job. So these are the things I would suggest you do. Organize meetings in advance so that they know when their first week in, they're meeting all the key people. Give them an organization chart. Again, it's so reassuring because all of a sudden you feel part of it and you know what people do. Confirm the job description. They should have had something probably through the process, but they may not have had a full job description. Outline their initial objectives and goals. And if it's a new role, so perhaps you haven't got those nailed down, that's one of the first things to work with them once they've started. Balance time between the training and delivery. So there will generally be some initial training, but it's nothing worse than your whole first week is training. And have the technology ready so that they actually can be productive. So final slide, top tips. Be clear on your requirements before starting the recruitment process. I think the most times we see recruitment processes fail is because that upfront work isn't taken seriously enough or is rushed. So it's not included the key stakeholders, or it's just like panic, someone's left, we need to recruit. It's really worth spending time at that front end of the process to make sure everything else is smooth after that. Make sure your key stakeholders are on board. Use experts to refine and fill your brief. If you think you're going to be stretched for time, you won't have a smooth process, and it's probably worth your money to go to an agency rather than spend all of that time that you could be using elsewhere. However you're doing it, be professional and timely. So if you're doing it yourself, make sure you keep all the candidates, even the candidates you're not interested in, be professional with them and let them know if they've been successful or not. If you're going through an agency, again, the same applies. The agency will be managing the candidate relationship, but they will need you to feedback in a timely way. If you found the one, then be flexible to get that confirmed offer and be welcoming from the start. And that's really from interview stage, because hopefully someone you interview is going to be that starter. Okay. So that's me, I'm done.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you've all taken away some nuggets from that. We've had a few questions come through, but if you do have any questions that you'd like us to address, then please do pop them in the Q&A. One brilliant question that I'm really happy for you, first of all, that you found the one. One of our attendees has asked, they have a new joiner coming on board who's currently serving a 3-month notice period starting in January. Should we invite them to the Christmas party?
Yes. No brainer.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I've actually got anecdotal evidence that it can be a massive plus, because this exact thing happened a couple of years ago. A client invited a soon-to-be colleague to the Christmas party, and it was just so reaffirming for them that they'd chosen the right person, because she got on so brilliantly with everybody, and it made her first day and first week even easier than it would have been anyway, because she'd already met everybody in a social context. There wasn't that awkwardness, you know, it was like, hi, it's me again, and everyone was really excited about her coming on board. So if you can, then yes, please do invite, and congratulations on finding the one. Just checking if there's any new questions coming through. I've had a really interesting question come through about somebody, I'm guessing that you've been burned by this in the past, asking how to assess things like attention to detail from a candidate through the interview process.
So if it's vital to the job, then I would suggest you do testing. So there are, you can either create your own test, which actually I quite like if you've got the time to do it, where you actually pick a real example of something from your business and give it to them and set them a task against it. And you can either do that, you know, bring them into the office and get them to do it in front of you, or you send it to them and get them to return it by a certain time. So we've done that before for clients, and it works really well. You can also buy little test packages. You can, of course, you can. Where you subscribe or you buy a package of 20. If you don't recruit very often, that might be too expensive for you, but they're not silly money. So yeah, I think if you've got particular things like that that are really important, then it's worth testing.
Absolutely. And again, it is something that agencies can help with, but don't always necessarily do as standard. So it's worth having a conversation with whatever agency you're using about what their assessment process is prior to sending candidates to you. And as Deb said, if it is something that's really, really key, then have a conversation about how they might be able to integrate that on your behalf, or bring in something that you've pre-prepared into their screening process. So maybe it's even done before they land in your inbox.
Yeah, and actually what we should probably say there, Joe, is not just competency testing like that, but for instance, we do psychometric profiling as well for senior roles. So if it's a really important role and it's got to integrate into the senior team or a bigger team, doing psychometrics at maybe final stage interview, so maybe you're down to 2 candidates, can often be really useful, not only for the recruitment process, but for ongoing development for the person who then ends up joining you. So that's also something to think about.
Absolutely, it's a fabulous tool to have in your arsenal. A question, I don't actually know the answer to this, and I don't know if you will, Deb, so I'm going to throw one at you. Last question is there a way of telling whether a candidate has used AI to create their CV?
There's a couple of tips. So if you're familiar with AI, you'll know how this works. If you receive something with certain lines in bold, so keywords boldened, for me, that's a big giveaway, because AI does that on everything. And really, if you're writing something yourself, it's the last thing you're likely to do. And I don't mean headings in bold. I mean, I'm a skilled marketer with experience in social media in bold, Instagram, blah, blah, so it's those sorts of things. So it's not always, but that for me is my first giveaway. And the second is if it's just not natural. What you find is people are using AI for CVs in particular. And if you give AI the job spec or the job ad and a draft CV, it does a great job. But it very often reads a little bit too well, a little bit too flowery. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, because if someone's got the wherewithal to use AI, fine. I mean, our advice to candidates is make sure it sounds like you. It's fine for a little bit of help or a starting point, but you don't just take it and then send that off. There are platforms now, apparently, I haven't actually experienced them, but there are platforms now where you just say, I want to apply for this job, and the AI takes your CV, molds it to the job and makes the application on your behalf. So when we talk about this one-click culture, I mean, it's just worse than that. It's not even, that's do nothing culture, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, watch this space. It's just going to keep evolving. It's going to get harder and harder to know, which makes the screening and interview process that much more important, because what you see on paper can be really far away from what you actually get in person.
Absolutely. I think it's also interesting to think about why you would need to question whether the CV was developed by AI, as Deb alluded to. You know, it's a growing skill, and maybe it's a positive thing that your candidate is able to utilize AI, but also utilizing the interview process to make sure that it's not hiding any lack of other skill. So again, come back to attention to detail, for example. Maybe they're leaning on AI because that isn't their forte. So making sure that we're assessing for those things later down the line, potentially.
It's an interesting, sorry, it really is interesting. I know you're about to finish. But if you think about let's just take spell check as an example. So I don't know how long ago we've had spell check. But, you know, you could argue now that you don't need to spell, because actually there's a spell check tool, and that doesn't take away from a person's capabilities. It just means they're not going to produce anything with a spelling mistake. So actually moving forward, if AI is coming to every aspect of our life, being able to use it and understand it is a positive. It's just whether it's hiding things is the thing you need to be able to find out.
But
I'm sharp.
Your investigation spectacles on. Thank you ever so much, Deb. I know that the audience today will have taken some nuggets from that. If there are specific areas that you require help with in your process, if you're stuck, if you're about to enter a process, even if you're coming to the end of a process and you need some guidance, we're always available to help. We love being able to support people and businesses in making that perfect match, and seeing some longevity in those matches as well. So thank you ever so much for giving us your time this lunchtime. I hope that you can enjoy the rest of your day and it's not too grey for you. And we very much hope to hear from you soon. A follow-up email will come out in the coming days with a recording. So if there's anything that you want to watch back or query, then please do. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye.